talk about the pelvis. The pelvis has something in common with the dresser drawers in the other room, in that the dresser drawer, the top drawer, let's say, is on a track system. It can only go in and out on that track system. It can't deviate in any direction. We have a track system built into our pelvis. And right in the corner of each side of the sacrum, there's these grooves that are cut in there. I don't know if you can see those, but there's a vertical groove that goes straight up and down, and then there's a horizontal groove. So it would look like this. There's this vertical groove and a horizontal groove.
Yes.
And when we walk, in order for the half of the pelvis, the innominate, to go through the range of motion in the gait cycle when we walk, is when the leg swings back behind us. It has to get there by going down the vertical and back on the horizontal like that to go into a forward and anterior pelvic tilt with the leg behind us. When the leg swings through to a heel strike, it has to come up that vertical and up the horizontal in order to get into this posterior position. And so when we walk, we're moving on that rail system, and we can only move in that. That's the only way these innominates can get into those positions. Now, we can compensate by just moving through the acetabulum, and as we get older and the pelvis freezes up, we start to shorten our strides because we can't get into a longer stride, and we start to walk with these tiny steps. So the movement's only here, and then things start to lock down. So one thing that affects the balance of this whole unit in general is the respiratory diaphragm. Big stingray-shaped muscle. Think of it as a plunger, and that this would be a sink with a stocked up, clogged up. When we take a breath in, that big stingray-shaped diaphragm muscle flattens, just like if we had a plunger and we pressed it down, and it presses everything down into this bony kind of tapered bone structure. And we have muscles on the floor, the pelvic floor, that takes that downward compression because it squeezes all our organs down and compresses them down in this direction. What happens is then that compression pushes both the innominates down the vertical and back on the horizontal, so it goes like that into a bilateral anterior pelvic tilt in a perfect world. And then when we exhale and the diaphragm comes back up, then we come back up into that horizontal and then up the vertical into a posterior pelvic tilt. And 20,000 times a day, plus or minus, we're going into those ranges of motion, which would be awesome. It's very small motion here, but it's amplified down the lever arm. Where the system gets jammed up, and when we start to have the ingredients to create a back problem, is nature put a big, thick, convex organ under primarily the right side of our diaphragm called our liver. So every time we take a breath in, the right side of the diaphragm hits that liver, but the left side has more compression. And so what happens over time is this left side, this left innominate, gets pushed down, and it starts to live at this end range of motion called an anterior pelvic tilt. And the down and back is important because that's what happens to the sit bone. Over on this side, because we have a lack of pressure, this side starts to come up like this. So we start to get a pelvis that looks like that, where the sit bones start to become uneven. The right sit bone will always be more superior or higher, closer to the right shoulder. And then what happens is we have this torsion pattern because this one is kind of stuck in an anterior and this is stuck in a posterior. So what that does to the sacrum is, in a balanced neutral pelvis, the sacrum would live right here. The innominates would reside there, so they'd have equal access to the vertical and the horizontal in walking. But now we've got one that's stuck at the end range here and one that's stuck there. And anytime someone comes in with a back problem and this right ischial tuberosity is more than, say, 1.5 inches, they've got a back problem, because what it does is it wedges the sacrum into the track system. And now, instead of having a sacral base that is parallel to the ground, and with a spine which is basically, you can think of as a slinky. It acts like a slinky. When you go forward, the facet joints or springs would open. When we come back, they close. When I lean to the left spring of the slinky or the facet joints on the left all close, and the ones on the opposite side open. And so that now what we've done, instead of having that on a nice narrow base, so that slinky is fully operational because it's got a little reflex at the top, so the eyes have to level to the horizon. That's for predators, that's a primal reflex. Now the sacral base is tilted, and so that slinky now has to make some scoliotic adjustments. It won't be idiopathic scoliosis where you have a big Z, but it'll start off and then it has to come either in an S curve, it comes back around at the top, or it's a big C curve or a double S curve. Anyway, that throws all the lumbar off and everything all the way up into the cranial system. So the resets, basically, the first one, and what the resets do is there's certain muscles that once you get into this pattern, there's certain muscles that the attachment points get closer together, so they adapt to that. And other, like on the back, these same attachment points are farther apart, so they get stretched and weak. So what happens is the tight muscles on this side would be the quadriceps, the left psoas, and the spinal erectors in the back. And the weak muscles are the hamstrings, the glute max, and those are the primary ones. And over here, what happens is the hamstrings become more dominant and the abdominal muscles. So you've got this imbalance of muscles. The 5 resets are basically, the first one levels up the ischial tuberosities. The second reset takes this anterior and puts it back into neutral. The third takes this posterior and puts it back into neutral. And then 4 and 5 basically put the sacrum back in the tract system, which is a big deal because this is 90% of all low back problems.
That makes sense.